აბა მიკროფონი დავტესტოთ.
აბა როგორ ახ?
ჩვენი ვრად ისმის კარგია.
კარგია.
Hello, Alex.
Hello, Milena. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for finding time and joining us. It's a great pleasure and great honor. So we'll be happy to host the webinar and hearing from you the insights, our things in the Balkans, not only in Serbia, and of course, what are the expectations in the Western Balkans from upcoming EC decisions, and then to be followed by the EU leaders' decisions.
Indeed, indeed. And I am planning to focus on the entire region, so we have an understanding there. I just wanted to ask you one thing. I made maybe a wrong assumption. Usually webinars are 1.5 hours. I have something at 7 o'clock that I have to leave for a little bit earlier. Do you think that it will take the whole 2 hours, the discussion?
No way. I'll try to keep it in 1.5 hours. I may be.
Okay.
It very much depends on you, definitely, and I'll give you initially 7-8 minutes. If it is not enough, feel free to keep talking, but do not look on the watches, and on the clock. So please do your opening remarks, your introductory remarks. Then I will come back. I will give to all three of you the floor. And I will come back with a new round on the questions. Then I will open the floor for the questions from the audience. If there are no questions, I will put some more questions. So it depends how it goes. Yeah, I usually do not do more than 1.5 hours, especially when we have 3 speakers. Previously, I had on the Karabakh issue, the chat, and there were 4 speakers, and it took quite a time. I mean, it was right immediately after the latest developments there.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
if it doesn't end in 2 hours, feel free. I will just give me the sign, you know, and I will let you go immediately.
Yeah, because
But,
I would have to leave at latest around 6:45.
no problem. No
Okay.
problem at all.
Okay. Great. Great.
Good
Thank you.
evening.
Hi.
Yeah, but I'm more than sure we will end by then. Definitely.
Good. Good. Great.
Now it is 5 o'clock, right? It's about 5
Yes. Yes.
5
It's fine.
in Belgrade. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Good.
Very
And
good.
at your
In
place,
Georgia,
it's
it's 7 o'clock.
yes, it's
7 o'clock. in the
7
evening.
o'clock.
Yes.
And is it usual for you to organize these evening webinars? Do you have good response?
Yes. Actually, this is the part of the Lithuanian project, joint projects with the Lithuanian embassy here in Georgia. And we did already three webinars with quite a good participation and feedbacks. And then it is picking up, you know, it is recorded and it is picking up on the views later on. It's a very legitimate question asking about the Friday night.
Yeah. This is why I'm asking because
7 o'clock, but we have a very specific audience. I mean, watching this because there are hot debates. I mean, this is the hot issue now, the upcoming decision of the European Commission. And it is there is quite a split in the society. Like, should we get this? Should we not? Should the government get this as a prize, etc., etc.? So a lot of questions.
I understand.
Yeah. So
Hi,
it's
Hi, Milena. Hello, dear Alex. Hello,
Good
Wojciech.
evening.
Teona, how are you?
Very
Hi.
well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
so
for
happy to-
joining us.
Yes,
Thank you
yes,
very
of course, with
much.
my pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be
Sorry,
happy.
I was a bit delayed.
We'll be happy to host you. We just wait for Wojciech Wojtasiewicz from Polish Institute of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, I'm here. Good
and
evening.
Hello.
he's here with us.
Yes.
Yes, he's
Oh,
already
good,
online.
good, very good, very
Yeah, I
good.
joined you like 5 minutes ago, but you
Oh, really?
discussed the you know the seminar issues, the time, so I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay. So you are quite familiar with this the internal issues and the developments in Georgia. So I will start right away.
Yeah,
I
that's
just
true.
okay. You prepared your interventions, and let's start it.
So we don't have anyone else joining us.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Good evening, dear friends and colleagues. Here we are again. The Rondelli Foundation continues its webinars on the EU enlargement and the integration process of the candidate and potential candidate states. I must say that this is happening with the great support of the Lithuanian embassy here in Georgia, and this is the 4th in a row webinar from the Rondelli Foundation. As usually, we have always the exceptional guests and the speakers. Tonight, we have a great panel of great speakers representing mostly the European countries in the region. First on my list is Ms. Milena Mihajlovic, who is the program director of the Center for European Politics. It is European Politics Center, it's correctly, I think, based in Belgrade.
Center, yes.
With a great experience of being part of the civil service, being the advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister. She worked, in fact, in the Ministry of the European Integration as well. And so she has an experience of, she is an experienced expert on the public administration's reform for OECD, the World Bank, and other international organizations. So I'm really very happy to welcome you, Milena, to our webinar tonight. Teona, Ms. Teona Lavrelashvili, she is Georgian, but now she is based based for years already in Brussels. She has earned her PhD from the KU Leuven University, and she is very experienced on the EU enlargement issues. And today and tonight, I will ask her, since she is the coordinator at the European Policy Center based in Brussels, coordinator for the EU enlargement, to enlighten us and to speak about how the process is foreseen of the EU reformation and EU enlargement. And last but not least, of course, we have tonight Mr. Wojciech Wojtasiewicz from Polish Institute of the Foreign Affairs, PISM, a very well-known institution, and the good colleagues from this institution for the Rondelli Foundation. And I'm happy that Mr. Wojtasiewicz was able to make this tonight. And he is basically focusing on Eastern Europe, on South Caucasus, and I will kindly ask him to speak about the Eastern Europe, about the trio, so associated trio. I will ask the question which I have asked before, whether the trio exists or not, or it is just duo of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia plus Georgia. So let me start with Milena. Milena, thank you once again. You are based in Belgrade. I would kindly ask you to give us insights regarding the views, positions, expectations, not only in Serbia, but also in Western Balkan countries. We all are waiting for the upcoming European Commission's enlargement report to be released on November 8th. And we Georgians are heavily debating what will be written in this report and how is it considered in the Western Balkan states, who are the candidates and potential candidates for the EU membership.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thanks to you and the Rondelli Foundation for inviting me to speak at this webinar and to share some perspectives on EU accession process and EU enlargement policy from the Western Balkan region. We as CEB Belgrade are deeply involved in the debates on the further progress, but also further reforms of the EU enlargement policy. And as you might know, together with our partners from the Center for European Policy Studies in Brussels, CEPS in Brussels, we are also creators of the proposal for the staged accession to the European Union, which has in the past 2 years become one of the most widely discussed proposals for reforming the EU enlargement policy. As you probably know, the region of the Western Balkans has been in the EU accession process for over 20 years. For the first time, the European perspective and EU membership perspective was given to the region back in 2003 at the Thessaloniki summit, which at that time was, I would say, a major breakthrough for the previously war-torn region. And we had really great expectations from this process. I remember coming back from my master's studies at the College of Europe back in 2005. I immediately started working from the EU Integration Office of the government of Serbia. And we were extremely motivated and extremely enthusiastic about the whole process, with high expectations that Serbia, along with other countries of the region, would be already in the European Union by now. I would say that, at that time, maybe the expectations were a little bit unrealistic, but certainly we were hoping that we would make it into the EU, for example, together with Croatia. From the entire group of countries that were given that perspective, European perspective, back in 2003, only Croatia has managed to actually enter the Union in 2013. While the rest of the region has been plagued by various problems and various difficulties, which combined with the EU's lack of prioritization and lack of interest in the enlargement policy in the period up to, basically up to the start of the bloody Russian aggression on Ukraine, these factors in combination have left us today, I would say, a rather dire state of affairs. Currently, I would have to say that none of the countries in the region is really accession ready, membership ready. Various countries have experienced various kinds of problems and issues. In some cases, such as the case of formerly Macedonia, now North Macedonia, this country has been plagued by unilateral vetoes coming from EU member states, first from Greece, and then after a major breakthrough with the signing of Prespa agreement, when Macedonia made a huge sacrifice and basically changed its name and agreed to many concessions and made many concessions, made many concessions to Greece. Immediately after that, they were blocked by Bulgaria, which now has different set of requirements and different set of, I would say, unilateral demands, which have little to do with accession methodologies and accession and membership criteria, and which are mainly related to issues of national identity. I would have to say that the events which have surrounded Macedonia's EU accession process have sent very bad signals, very negative signals around the entire region, basically communicating to the region's governments that, making hard concessions and hard choices in the EU accession process might not be politically very opportunistic or very useful, and that even if you make these sacrifices and even if you meet the conditions which are made in the process, you might end up being left behind in the process with few rewards and little actual progress in the process. We know that North Macedonia is now just at the start of its EU accession talks, and it cannot actually even start full membership negotiations until they change the constitution and include the Bulgarian minority in their constitution. So politically, for North Macedonia, it is now very difficult to proceed. In the meantime, Montenegro has managed to change the government and make a democratic breakthrough after 30 years of single-party government and leadership in Montenegro, but the country is now plagued with internal political difficulties. Bosnia and Herzegovina is still plagued with difficult relationships between its ethnic constituent peoples, and the country is semi-functional to be very kind. Whereas in other countries of the region, where I can count Serbia, Kosovo, but also to an extent Albania, we see very little real political motivation to press on with the difficult reforms, and especially the ones related to the functioning of democracy, democratic standards, and rule of law, reform of the judiciary, fight against corruption, etc. So right now, I think that what the EU is trying to do is to somehow revive the process. But of course, as I said, considering the prolonged process of the prolonged stagnation in the process, and the fact that the process has been so open-ended without an actual membership perspective on the horizon, we still cannot see that there is a real, let's say, real enthusiasm and a real momentum to press on with the reforms and to make substantial progress in the accession process. We badly need a good story, a positive story in the Balkans, and we are all rooting for the Montenegrins to manage to form the government after another election which recently took place. And hopefully, if Montenegro manages to, get their act together and make more substantive progress, we might have at least one success story, even if it is the smallest country in the region. As you said, we are all eagerly expecting the new enlargement package of the European Commission, where, depending on where you come from in the region, I would say that expectations are different. As somebody who now is a member of the Serbian civil society and who works a lot on these processes, I think that it will be crucial that the Commission's new report objectively assesses the situation in Serbia, especially with regards to democracy and rule of law, because in the country we have seen numerous signs of backsliding in these most fundamental areas in the EU accession process. But what we would also like to see, and especially with the publication of the growth plan for the Western Balkans, which will be part of this enlargement package, we would like to see creation of new incentives and new ideas on how the region can be stimulated both economically but also institutionally to make substantive progress in this process. I can speak a little bit more, maybe in the continuation of the discussion, on what are the exact changes that we would like to see and what are these proposals that we are making and which we are discussing intensively, both with member states but also with EU institutions. But I will stop here for the introductory remarks.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Milena. It's very good, very insightful remarks and the characterization of the state of affairs in the majority, of almost in each of the potential candidate countries in the Western Balkans. I will come back to you with the questions. We learn more questions are coming up, as you know, of course. And the incentives, new proposals and suggestions are, of course, very important to hear for us, for Georgians and many others as well, to come up with the similar effective initiatives and ideas. But before I go to the Eastern European countries, good friends of ours and good strategic partners, Ukrainians as well as Moldovans, and before we talk about Georgia, I would like to hear from Teona. What is the goal of the EU reformation, and how do you see? I saw a lot of coming up about the discussions about the EU reformation. What is all this about, Teona, and what is expected to get from this reformation process?
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Alex. Good evening, dear Milena and Wojciech. Once again, I'm very happy to be here and discuss with you some aspects of the EU enlargement policy, and which is, as you mentioned, dear Alex, it's also linked, of course, to the EU's potential reform process. But first of all, I also would like to thank Milena for her very realistic and very much interesting comments, because it somehow also reflects and signals, first of all, that's the kind of a clash, if I may so. On the one hand, this narrative that we have, at least that is very much prevalent in Brussels, that is that the EU enlargement has become, of course, and is a geopolitical tool, and there is a momentum, and that lots of actors, and first of all the institutional but also political actors primarily, they think that they have to do something. But on the other hand, we have a regional and a perspective coming from the candidate countries, which also signal and indicate that there are many things need to be done from that perspective as well. So therefore, on the one hand, we share indeed this perspective that EU's enlargement policy is no longer a mere, let's say, foreign policy tool, but for the EU is a geopolitical instrument that I mentioned. But also on the other hand, we also realize that there is lots of operational challenges that lie ahead for the EU before it enlarges. And for instance, if we envisage having the EU that comprises of 37 member states, that is 27 plus Western Balkan 6, the EU associated trio, and also Turkey, then we also must anticipate the complexities. And these complexities, first of all, is linked, and Milena has also mentioned the case of North Macedonia, that is linked to veto power of the member states, that it is the foreign security policies. Of course, the decisions are being taken with the consensus, and the EU is not yet ready to discuss or to make a substantial, let's say, steps in order to have the decisions making process under the qualified majority voting. However, I mean, since you asked also these questions related to the EU reform, I would like to perhaps share with you some of, let's say, modest reflections or assessments that how I see, let's say, some key processes affiliated to the EU reform. And here I would like to mention the Franco-German paper that has been recently published, and I believe that this is a very good foundation, but it is a foundation and it's a framework, let's say, because it needs also further input, not only from the expert side, but also from the institutional side, to see where are we and what are the, let's say, next steps in this respect. So I would like to perhaps start from the fact what will happen to the European Parliament when we have the enlargement. So of course, it's very simple to see that, of course, with the new members, the number of the MEPs will increase. However, if it increases in a proportional way, which is now envisaged, that at this stage it definitely will call some questions when it comes to the governability of the European Parliament, because because there will be many complexities in this respect, and this therefore a certain solution needs to be found. And I think that the Franco-German paper and the solution that they offer, it can be a good rationale. However, whatever formula is found, we should also anticipate that the role of the European Parliament might get weakened unless there is not increase in the power. And so the formula, for instance, of the new composition of the European Parliament could be so-called Cambridge Compromise, Cambridge formula. However, in such a way that each member state receives a base of 5 seats, and the remaining seats are dividing between the member states in proportion to their population. That is also subject to constraints. But this recommendation, base plus proportional formula, also needs a further deliberation. But one idea in this respect, and we have heard from European Parliament President Roberta Metsola, that she has recently alluded to the fact that perhaps the candidate countries, I think she did not really mention all the candidate countries. At this stage, she mentioned only Ukraine, when she suggests, okay, why not to invite the members of the parliament to have observer status in the European Parliament. I don't know what Milena and Wojciech think about this idea, but I think that this, of course, on the one hand, we can assume that it is a good idea if we think that the rationale behind is this institutional rapprochement and the socialization effect, and of course this sectorial or phased-in or staged accession. I believe that Milena also had this idea in her proposal of the staged accession at one of the stages. But in my point, it is important also to think what will be the relationship between among this, on the one hand, the observer members and also the delegations, because we know that the European Parliament, they already have delegations on Ukraine, on Georgia, on South Caucasus. So there are already many institutional, let's say, and also Euronest parliamentarism. So there are many, like say, subgroups already existing in the European Parliament. So therefore, idea should not be like adding another layer of bureaucratic, let's say, or institutional, let's say, burden, but it should be important to understand what will be an added value in reality of this idea. So on the commissioners, as you have seen, the paper suggesting to reduce the size of the commissioners, but as you know very well, of course, for the national from national perspective, member states, basically, this having their own commissioner, it means a lot, because even though we know that commissioners should be very much neutral, and it's post that is, and we know that they are the hearings are in the parliament to make sure the commissioners, they perform their duties in a good way and so on. But nevertheless, each member states, they select these commissioners, and the national political considerations are there. So and therefore I think that's and this rationale is indeed in the Franco-German paper, but the way I think how they would like to solve it perhaps doesn't necessarily solve the main question, that is efficiency question, because they suggest, okay, we are going to have, let's say, lead commissioners and other commissioners. So basically, we will not have the reduction in the size of the commissioners. It just the roles will be altered, and in this case, I think that further reflections are needed to streamline this procedure, because I mentioned this does not really answer the question on how to address the need for an operational efficiency, the significant imbalance between substance heavy on the one hand and relatively high portfolios in the case of arrival of the 10 commissioners, because as you know, there are, let's say, very interesting portfolios, like very heavy, and then there are also light, let's say, cases or dossier. I mean, this is the better word. And then finally, if I have a few minutes more, it's about the qualified majority voting, which is indeed very much debated subject also in Brussels. And as you know, in May 2023, this initiative to advance the qualified majority voting was spearheaded by a coalition of 9 member states, led by mainly Germany, France, and Italy. But however, as you know, the progress is rather limited because many EU countries, such as especially Central and Eastern countries, they fear that their right of let's say, veto and their influence will be reduced, and they are very cautious because they think that perhaps their interests will be sidelined without this veto power. So, of course, on the one hand, there is a very common argument and narrative that adopting the qualified majority vote would enhance the speed of and effectiveness of the EU's foreign and security policy. However, we should also look into the other side, that is that without having a strategic culture in the EU, it will also lead to let's say, into question to what extent the countries will be able to shift from the culture of this qualified to a culture of, let's say, from a culture of consensus to a qualified majority voting culture. So these cultures are important to take into account. So therefore, I mean, final point, and then of course I'm happy to answer the questions, because of course with this let's say 10 minutes intervention, we could not really cover all the important aspects of the EU reform agenda. But I think that the final remark that I mentioned is indeed an acknowledgement of the fact that, of course, the enlargement momentum is there, and we know that it has a geopolitical, let's say, underpinnings, and it is a geopolitical tool. However, we should also be realistic and to manage the expectations, because, I mean, from certain leaders, listening to certain leaders in Brussels, arguing that or making political statements that, for instance, in a few years, for instance, Ukraine or other countries, like in, I don't know, 2 to 5 years, they will become member of the EU. I think that it is not politically responsible statement. So I think that we need to be, of course, very much ambitious, but also pragmatic and manage the expectations. Otherwise, it will backfire. And this is important to take into account. Therefore, reflections are needed if whether, on the one hand, whether the EU will be able to deliver on the enlargement and how it will be able. So the first, let's say, I think 2 options, right? So it's really rather clear, more or less. So one option is whether, I mean, EU is going to pursue this traditional or classical enlargement, so giving the full membership, or are we going to have a different model that is a sectorial integration, phased in, staged accession, that is rapprochement step by step? And I think that the second model is much more realistic, also taking into account the way how the political situation is developing in not only in Belgium, in Brussels, but first of all in the EU member states, and we will be having lots of important elections. Elections in Poland, of course, as very good, important, and very interesting and important and democratic outcome is great. But also we have election results in Slovakia, we are in the US, so they're really like. A bigger picture should be taken into account, and I think that if the EU wants to be delivered on enlargement, we should be pragmatic, and we should be also having an approach that incorporates the candidate countries and potential candidate countries' perspectives, and not like say top-down approach. It should be more horizontal approach. Okay, I will stop here, and I'm ready to answer, of course, to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Teona. Thank you very much. I had some idea about the complexity and the difficulty of integration process. Now you topped on it the enlargement process and the reformation itself. So of course it's not easy. Of course, a lot of issues, potentially 8, 9, 10 countries to be integrated effectively and timely in European Union is not only task for the candidate countries, but itself for the European Union. You touched upon a number of issues like the dates, the possible timelines, and of course, I will come back to you with the question about 2030. But because before I come back to you, I want to give the floor to Wojciech. It's not strange that I'm not asking Teona about the perspectives of Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, because Wojciech is dealing a lot and has the in-depth knowledge of the Georgia, the Moldova, Ukrainian politics. So, Wojciech, could you give us the insights and the perspectives for this trio in upcoming decision-making process?
So good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great honor and pleasure to participate in debate organized by Rondelli Foundation. Rondelli Foundation was one of the first think tanks in Georgia which I visited in 2008 when I was in Georgia for the first time. And every time when I'm in Tbilisi, I'm trying to visit your place. But coming to the topic of our discussion, so the issue of EU enlargement was discussed for many years. I mean the eastern direction, and as you know, in 2008, Poland and Sweden proposed the European Partnership, the EU program to integrate the post-Soviet republics, and that process was developed, was continued in the next years. Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia signed the association agreement, DCFT, also, but that process of EU integration was a little bit different in every of those three countries. Generally, the politic elite in Georgia was pro-European. Almost all of the political parties, UNM and Georgian Dream. The situation was a little bit more complicated in Ukraine and Moldova, because in the past there was also some pro-Russian political forces, but the situation was completely changed after the Russian aggression on Ukraine in 2021. And there was a momentum which was used by Ukrainian government, by President Volodymyr Zelensky. He decided to apply for EU membership, for the candidate status, and Ukraine was followed by Moldova and Georgia. And as you know also, but I would like to mention about it, in 2022 on June, the European Commission and European Council decided to give Ukraine and Moldova the candidate status. Unfortunately for Georgia, there was a different decision. There was a decision about the European perspective for Tbilisi, and all of those three countries received from Brussels several recommendations which should be fulfilled to continue this integration process. Georgia got 12 recommendations, Moldova 9, and Ukraine 7. And as you mentioned, Mr. Petriashvili, this fall, 8th of November, there will be a special report prepared by European Commission about the fulfillment of those recommendations, about those not only those three countries, but all the countries which are interested in integration with the European Union. And in my opinion, Ukraine and Moldova can be quite calm regarding the remarks in those reports, and I'm pretty sure that those countries will be able to start the negotiations regarding the future membership to European Union. The situation, the case of Georgia looks much more complicated, let's say, in that way. Unfortunately, the Georgian government is not able or doesn't want it, or it's difficult for Georgian government to fulfill those recommendations. And many Georgian think tanks which prepared partial reports about the fulfillment of those recommendations indicated that only 3 from 12 recommendations were fully fulfilled. Some of them are partially fulfilled, and several the most important recommendations, like the political depolarization, the oligarchization, the media freedom, the reform of judiciary system, is not fulfilled, and it's quite problematic. And in the case of Georgia, this is also the problem of the attitude of Georgian authority and government. Unfortunately, we are able to observe for several last years, and especially after the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war, that the foreign policy of Georgia is more and more multi-vector, let's say, or even pro-Russian. There were many issues which indicated that the Georgian government is trying to put on the agenda interests of the Russian Federation. I'm talking about the reassumption of flights between Tbilisi and Moscow, generally Russia and Georgia. I'm also talking about the quite huge Russian diaspora in Tbilisi and Batumi, those people, refugees, which decided to come to Georgia after the outbreak of the Ukrainian-Russian war, and after the announcement of partially mobilization by Vladimir Putin. And also there is also a factor which is not always or not very often indicated during discussions like this. I mean the strategic partnership between Georgia and China. This document was signed and announced at the end of July this year, and I would like to underline that I think it's really important. It means that Georgian government is trying to prepare yourself and the Georgian population for the negative decision of European Union, and try to show also the European Union that there is another possibility to develop Georgia economically and politically. I mean, you know, developing the relations with China, and especially, I'm talking about the decision who will be the builder of the port in Anaklia. In my opinion, it will be the biggest infrastructure investment in the upcoming years in Georgia. And unfortunately, in Georgia, we are able to observe the not decreasing but increasing political polarization. Last week there was the case of the impeachment of President Salome Zorabishvili, something which was viewed in the European Union very badly. I think it had a very negatively impact of Georgian-European relations, and I'm really afraid of the final decision of the European Council and European Union about Georgia, and I see three possible directions. In my opinion, in the first option is that the European Council will decide to give candidate status to Georgia, but with some conditions, and those conditions will mean to fulfill those 12 recommendations until the next year, until the parliamentary elections, and also to conduct those parliamentary elections in a free manner. And there will be also the condition that the candidate status could be even retaken if Georgian government will not fulfill those conditions, recommendations. The other option is to wait with the final decision regarding the candidate status until the next year, until the parliamentary elections. And the third option is decision will be negative, and the European Council, European Union will inform Georgia that they are able to come back to the issue of candidate status and EU integration in the future if Georgian government fulfills all the recommendations. But in such case, European Union needs to be prepared to the anti-European campaign of a Georgian Green government and try to explain its decision to Georgian population. We should remember that almost 90% of the Georgian society supports EU integration. So I think that decision will be really important for Georgians. And I'm pretty sure if the decision will be negative, there will be a huge demonstration in Georgia, and there's a risk even of the new street revolution. And the Georgia government is afraid of such scenario and the situation, because they started talking about those revolutionary option, which is somehow prepared by West, by European Union, by US. The people are trained, you know, those processes financed by the Western NGOs and so on and so on. But okay, let's see. We will see what will be the final decision. If I should answer that question, what will be the decision of the European Union? Today, I'm rather close to the option that Georgia will get the candidate status, but there will be the statement that you need to really focus on reforms, and you need to stop that anti-European and anti-Western rhetoric. And also the last issue, it's really important to come back to the Western path in foreign policy. Unfortunately, it's not only the problem of fulfillment of those 12 recommendations, but unfortunately, Since 2022, the foreign policy of Georgia is far away from the European perspective, especially regarding the war in Ukraine. So maybe for the beginning, it's enough. Those are my reflections, and I'll try to develop some issues later. Thank you.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thank you very much for your very straightforward and for thought-provoking scenarios in particular, which is we are hearing too. Of course, despite the difficulties, despite the shortcomings, we hope a lot that the Georgian people, you mentioned 90% of Georgians, and the Georgian people deserve the decision to be made, a positive decision to be made. I have heard from previous webinars also the possibility of adding extra new conditions like free and fair elections, as well as the improvements in the alignment on the foreign policy. I do not know, frankly speaking, whether these conditions will be met positively and with the optimism from the government, because they believe that the appeasement policy towards Russia and their position towards Russia's war in Ukraine gives them the chance to keep country safe and in a peace, away from bombings and the opening of the second front. In fact, we witnessed the opening of the second front by Russia against Israel by having meetings with the Hamas leaders in Moscow today. But let me be for a second the devil's advocate. What is wrong with the partnership with China? The Georgian Dreams leadership is saying that, arguing that European Union, United States, the entire world is trying to keep good and strong ties and the good economic ties with China. What's wrong with the deepening relationship simultaneously with China and with European Union?
I mean, it's natural that the country like Georgia would like to have also good relations with China, one of the biggest country in the world. Okay, it's natural, but this is a huge difference between good relations and the strategic partnership. And I'm really afraid of, you know, the political, financial, economic domination of China in Georgia, especially when we are talking about the Anaklia port, and also the road infrastructure. A lot of roads, highways in Georgia used to be constructed by the Chinese companies, and unfortunately with many problems. I mean, delays, problem with with increasing cost of those construction works, problems with rights of workers, and so on and so on. And if you would like to integrate with the Western world, you should concentrate of developing relations with the Western world. So if the process of choosing the strategic investor, you are deciding to choose the China one, not the European one, it's a contradictory activity. So in my opinion, it is problematic, but I think that the Georgian government also thinks in that way. Okay, if we let China to construct some infrastructure in Georgia, like Anaklia, like East-West Highway, Russia in the future will not be able to attack us once again, because Beijing calls to Moscow and say, don't do this because we have our own infrastructure in Georgia, so you can destroy our infrastructure in that country. Okay, maybe it's kind of a good idea to think about it and to develop the external relations of Georgia. And I can also understand the attitude of the Georgian government regarding Russia, regarding Ukraine, regarding sanctions. I can fully understand those huge trauma from 2008 war, which is among the Georgian people, and the Georgian government is also aware that that in the situation of another attack of Russia, the Georgian government will be somehow alone. Georgia will not be even able to fight with Russia, like Ukraine, because it's a small country with the population 3.7 million people. So there will be not enough population capacity to fight with Russia. So from one side, it's really good that the Georgian government it's trying to be calm, it's trying to be cautious regarding the war in Ukraine. But from the other side, I really don't understand those anti-Ukrainian, anti-Western, and anti-European sorry, I just forgot the word. I mean, tendencies in Georgia, and the problem is because for many years there was an accusation from the Georgian opposition that the Georgian Dream is pro-Russian party, that Bidzina Ivanishvili is a friend of Kremlin. And at the beginning of the rules of Georgian Dream, I was quite skeptical to such kind of thinking. I just thought that Mikhail Saakashvili United National Movement was super pro-European, super pro-Western, extremely anti-Russian, and in their perspective, everyone who wants to try to establish normalization process with Russian Federation, it will be pro-Russian. But unfortunately, since several last years, I'm really afraid of the change of the narrative of the Georgian government. And from one side, I can understand that they are afraid of Moscow, but from the other side, there's also the accusations that there are some economic ties between Tbilisi, political elite in Tbilisi and Moscow. I can also understand that the Georgian Dream government, if it's not interested in reality in integration with the European Union, they can't come out and say we are not interested in EU membership, because they are pretty sure that there will be in 5 minutes a revolution on the street, because most of the people are pro-European. So that's why they need to do what they are doing already. I mean, accusing of European Union of forcing them to open the second front. They are repeating that they've already fulfilled of the recommendation, and now the ball is on the side of the European side, and so on and so on. But unfortunately, their activities are not on the same level like their theoretically political agenda. So it's quite complicated issue, but as I said already, I think the best solution in such circumstances now will be to give Georgia candidate status with remarks that this is the result of more than 30 years of reforms conducted by Shevardnadze, by Saakashvili, by Ivanishvili. And this is because of the pro-European attitude of Georgian society, population, but it should be underlined that if Georgia is interested in real integration with the European Union, its government needs to fulfill all of those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. You just kind of designed the proposal for the European Commission to be the sentences to be written in the report. Thank you very much. I will come back to you with another question. I just want to ask Milena. Milena, Teona has talked about the step-by-step approach of the integration of the candidate countries. This looks like and sounds like more realistic, but would the countries, candidate countries, be happy and agree to that approach? Of course, I agree also with Teona that the managing the expectations is very important, and the dates which have been named by some of the leaders, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it may not be quite doable. But Charles Michel, the president of the European Union Council, and also other leaders have mentioned that 2030 could be the date when we could expect the enlargement of the European Union. What is your view about this, Milena? I would be happy to hear about this step-by-step, stage-by-stage rapprochement of the candidate countries and the possible dates for the integration.
Thank you, Alex, for this pertinent question. Well, I would like to begin by saying that the staged accession proposal and the proposed target year of 2030 are incredibly well aligned, and they really reinforce each other. They have different purposes to an extent, but put together, I think that they would greatly improve on the one hand, the incentives and the enthusiasm for reforms in the candidate countries, and at the same time help the EU prepare for the next enlargement. The 2030 target year has really been understood here in the region not as a promise date for the accession of the countries, but rather as EU's signal, a strong signal which could come from the EU that the EU is, for the first time after 10 years at least, really serious about enlargement, that the actual enlargement of the European Union is back on the table, and that the EU is working hard and working in a committed manner to making enlargement happen as soon as possible. Of course, as you probably also know, target dates have throughout the history of European integration served as a powerful tool to stimulate internal reforms and preparations of the EU. We can only think of the target date for the completion of the single market, 1986. We can think of Agenda 2000, which was all about preparing the single market for the enlargement, but we all know that enlargement didn't happen until 4 years later. We also have numerous other target dates that the EU is committing to at present times, which are related to the various internal reforms and policies of the EU, not least the 2050 carbon neutrality target date. So I think that this kind of a target date would be extremely powerful tool for the EU to work in a committed way on preparing itself for the enlargement, while at the same time sending an incredibly important signal to the candidate countries that finally, for the first time after a long period of stagnation and open-ended process, that really enlargement, so accession, is possible. This would, in my view, in the view of us at CEP, who have been analyzing and following the process for a long time, this would really help stimulate the pro-European political actors in our countries. In some countries, those are the parties which are in the position, which are in government. In others, those could be opposition parties. For example, my hope for my country is rather that creation of a strong signal from the EU would help the pro-European democratic opposition in the country become stronger and enrich and help the quality of our democracy. On the other hand, the staged accession proposal was developed by us and our colleagues from CEPS Brussels with the view to sort of reconcile the needs and concerns from both sides, both from the candidate countries and from member states. On the one hand, for the pre-accession process, we have proposed 2 stages which would revolve around certain groups or bundles of benefits, of incentives for the politicians, but also for the populations. We have proposed significant increases in pre-accession assistance that would boost socioeconomic development and help reduce the socioeconomic convergence gap between our region and the EU, which, mind you, has been increasing in the past years rather than decreasing. And the EU accession process is supposed to help countries catch up with the EU, right? So if the countries have not been catching up, this means that the EU needs to step up its offer to the region, but in a way that is going to be predictable, that is going to be merit-based, and that is going to really be based on the quality of the reforms, on the results of the reforms in the countries. Right now, we see that the political process is really not based on the reforms. It is not based on where we are in terms of our preparedness for membership. For example, North Macedonia is in terms of the results of the reforms and preparedness, overall preparedness for membership, which, as we know, is assessed every year by the Commission. It is on a par with Serbia and Montenegro, and in the political process, it is falling behind. What our proposal is suggesting is that already from the pre-accession period, candidate countries should receive benefits in terms of finance, but also in terms of access to the EU's institutions, based on the achieved level of progress of preparedness for membership, which is assessed by the Commission. On the other hand, we have tried to take the concerns of member states into account when developing this proposal, which is why we suggested that there should be sort of an intermediary membership stage, which in our model is the 3rd stage of the process, where countries would become members. So, of course, they would have to sign and have ratified accession treaties, and before that meet all membership criteria. But once they join, for a certain period of time, which we have estimated should last up to 10 years, their voting rights in the council would be restricted in the sense that they would not be able to exert veto. So they would be able to vote on all qualified and simple majority issues. They would be able to participate in the construction of consensus, but they would not be able to block EU's decisions in unanimity ruled matters. This would be a temporary derogation of these membership rights. And after the passage of the first 10 years, this transitional period, these new members would gain full membership rights and full voting rights in the council. What we have also suggested is that in these first 10 years of membership, the EU should ensure through accession treaties a strong safeguard net for itself, which would allow the Commission to trigger these safeguard clauses. We have had them in the previous enlargements as well. They were just more narrow and they lasted for only 3 years. Now we have suggested to increase these safeguard clauses to a period of 10 years and to widen their scope so that they can cover the entire area of rule of law and democracy, which means that if a new member starts to backslide on these key European Union's values, that the Commission could trigger these clauses and impose certain restrictions on these countries until they fall back in line. We believe that by proposing this transitional period after accession, we would help the EU continue and finalize its internal reforms, which are likely to take more than 7 years. So I don't think that the EU will be able to make itself fully enlargement ready by 2030. But if it has this additional period of safeguard clauses and transitional measures with the new member states, that would allow it to work for an additional 10 years to consolidate its institutional and legal framework, the decision-making procedures in a way that is going to be really fit for this enlarged membership.
Have you discussed the check the ground with the Brussels and with the European bureaucrats, politicians, diplomats who are working on the reformation.
Yes, indeed. And we
Your
have not stopped
proposal.
with the EU institutions. We are, we were from the very beginning, but especially now we are going through a very intensive advocacy campaign with member states as well. So by the end of the process, we will have covered probably 23 to 25 member states with our advocacy work. We will try to actually also, in various ways cover the rest of the member states too. We have also discussed with candidate countries. And of course, I mean, there are differing views. Not everybody agrees on everything, but what has already entered the mainstream, since we have been in this process and these discussions basically since 2018. So one of my earlier papers from 2018 was partially taken as an inspiration for the French non-paper in 2019, which then triggered the revised enlargement methodology. But we considered that the steps and the changes which were introduced with the revised methodology in 2020 didn't go far enough. Neither in the stimulations and incentives for the candidate countries, nor in terms of responding to the key question, what happens when a candidate country is ready? Will the EU be able to absorb that candidate country? So with this proposal, we have tried to answer these questions. And what I can see now is that already some parts of our proposal have entered the mainstream. We see that the Commission has already proposed a significant increase of pre-accession assistance through the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework. Additional 2 billion euros have been proposed for Western Balkan countries. Now our job is to try to make sure that this money doesn't go into the wrong pockets, that it goes to those countries that are the most deserving, that are the most prepared for membership, but also most dedicated to EU reforms. The Commission is also proposing additional phasing in and sectoral integration measures, which are not as deeply embedded as part of our model, but they're very complementary. And from what we know, the Commission is also now thinking about these transitional periods, arrangements, and safeguard clauses as an instrument that will help more smoothly integrate new members into the EU. We are now also trying to convince the member states and the Commission that these stages in the pre-accession process would also be important. And these stages are especially important for the countries that are falling back in the process, that are the backbenchers in the process. Because, for example, for the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I could say the same, for example, for the governments of Moldova or Georgia, the actual membership is too far on the political horizon. So it is difficult to really create a strong pro-European political agenda. Yes, there are certain parts of the process which are stimulating. For example, opening of accession talks can be a rather stimulating moment. But other than that, the process is quite flat. Opening of chapters and clusters now doesn't bring anything tangible to the citizens, and financial support has been rather flat. So this is what we want to create with these stages, to help the governments or political parties in the region create tangible and predictable and achievable milestones in this very long and demanding process.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Milena. I'll come back to you. I cannot miss the opportunity to ask you about the light in the end of the tunnel in relationship between Serbia and Kosovo. Of course, it will be the crucial issue, the most, I think, the crucial issues for both. And if there is any chance for coming to the agreement. I know it is hard, of course, and of course I will come back to you with the question about the upcoming snap elections in Belgrade, in Serbia. Is this a continuation of the changes which we have just witnessed in Poland? The results of the elections. I'll come back to you, but now I have a question to Teona. Teona, you definitely follow closely the debates here in Georgia about the granting the candidate status, not granting candidate status, and what Milena has just mentioned about the the reality of the political European agenda is accession talks is a good stimulus for the further integration and further movement towards the European Union. But I want to hear from you your view about the what does this really mean, the candidate status? Here are the debates about candidate status without reforms does not mean too much, and there is the counter the vision about the candidate status as the real ticket to the European Union. What is your view about that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sir Alex, for this question. But before answering to that, or trying to answer to that, I would like to also bring one point which I believe is also important that we reflect upon, and that is the European political community and its future and its linkage to the EU enlargement. Of course, we know that it is not an alternative, or it should not be an alternative to EU enlargement process. However, as a political space where also, of course, Georgia, but also other countries are part of it, I think that it creates a very interesting setting in order to not only to advance negotiations on enlargement, but also to discuss many other pertinent issues, such as discussions on climate, discussions on energy. And for instance, as we know, the number of the contracts, the energy contracts that the EU has signed with non-EU countries are around around 30. So it also means that this collaboration with the European countries that are not member of the EU, it's very important. And also, I believe that's one practical operational idea that perhaps I can also emphasize is a possibility to reflect together to what extent the think tank community can be engaged in kind of a steering committee, let's say, process of this initiative, because as we know, there is not necessarily the same understanding from the German and the French perspective what should be the European political community. And I think that if the think tank community can become part of it in terms of this steering committee, or we can reflect on that, it can lead a very interesting outcome, because we need this political space not only for the socialization effect, but also to build this trust. And in politics and in the enlargement process, building the trust is very important. So therefore, there is a potential for this European political community, but we need a vision for that. And I see the potential for the think tank community. So now regarding the question, and I will try to be brief, because as I see that we are running out of the time. I think that's and Milena knows much better than me that indeed, it really depends how are we going to interpret the term candidate status, because of course, from a political perspective, it's a very important step, especially for Georgia under the current context and the political situation. However, I think that the biggest achievement for Georgia and the affirmation that the country will become at some point a member of the EU, but we don't know what kind of EU, but it will become member of the EU, is the enlargement perspective that was granted to Georgia. So this enlargement or membership perspective was and has been the beginning of Western Balkans European aspirations in Thessaloniki, as was mentioned. And for Georgia, that is there as well. And so it's now up to us how we are going to continue the process. But the candidate status does not mean that we will necessarily advance on EU integration path in a different way. It is a next step forward. It is an important step forward. But I think that in Georgia, it is very much, let's say, overestimated from a different political reasons. I don't want to say it's a politicized, but to a certain extent, perhaps this is closer to that, because this is the start of a very bureaucratic process. So this is opening and closing the clusters, the negotiation process. And I think that's also to ease in this negotiation process, the qualified majority voting, if the extension of the qualified majority voting can be used in that perspective, not necessarily in the whole, let's say, CFSP GSP, but at least to open and close the clauses, the negotiation chapters. So one remark on that in that respect. Therefore, to try to sum up is the following: that I believe that Georgia deserves a candidate status, Georgian people, but also Georgia as such. Of course, there are a number of priorities that need to be fulfilled, but we should not forget that these priorities and other steps are also there for Ukraine, but also for Moldova. We know that Ukraine is a very pertinent problem, that is also corruption. In Moldova, that is also public administration. And when you look at the Georgian public administration and in general the capacity of the state to perform reforms and so on is there. Of course, we need more political enthusiasm, but I think that in terms of the capacity, the country deserves the candidate status, and I think that we will get this status. However, as I mentioned, managing the expectations is important, and we should really understand, Georgians, that these reforms that we are doing or we will be doing is not for the EU as such, but it's for us. It's for the country to progress as a democratic and as a resilient state. Therefore, the reform agenda should continue, but candidate status, as well as Milena made a good point when it comes to the date of the accession process, that it is not a promise, but again, it is understood in a different way. In Ukraine, it's understood as a date. Of course, in the Western Balkans, no, because they know how the enlargement works. But in the associated countries, we don't yet have this kind of understanding. Therefore, the candidate status is an important step for Georgia. However, we already did an important achievement, that is a membership perspective, and through the candidate status, now of course it's a new impetus, a new momentum for Georgia to continue its reform agenda and start the accession talks. I hope, of course, not in the upcoming year, because it's will be mainly discussions for Ukraine and for Moldova, but the Georgia should be, of course, naturally part of it. Thank you.
You listen to the options, scenarios proposed by the Wojciech, and which one you think you would bet on? Do you expect any extra conditions to be put and proposed to Georgia in combination with granting Georgia the candidate status?
I think the conditions will be there, not only for Georgia, but again for Moldova and Ukraine. And these conditions will be part, of course, of the accession talks. If the Commission decides to recommend opening the accession talks for Ukraine and Moldova, this, of course, will be, everything comes with the conditions. The process is and should be merit-based, so there are no shortcuts. But for Georgia, of course, I also hear and the many options that or requests, if I may, so that's there was even, as Wojciech, I think, mentioned that, okay, let's grant a candidate status to Georgia, but if we see that country is not performing, we can, let's say, take this away. But legally is not possible. So because the candidate status itself is not defined under the EU law, the treaty. So it's not a legal term. It's something that is part of the, let's say, EU jargon, and it's something that bureaucrats are using in order to track the progress. Therefore, conditions will be part of it. But again, it depends on the homework, let's say, of Georgians, how we are going to fulfill the recommendations. But again, we cannot, and nobody is expecting us, neither from Ukraine or from Moldova, to fulfill all the recommendations they have. Otherwise, there is no point of this merit-based approach, and everybody then would be happily married with the EU. It just it's a work in progress, but we need more political enthusiasm. We need more, of course, political commitment, because administrative capacity is there. But I don't expect that the Commission will recommend, let's say, a new way of granting Georgia candidate status. I think that in this respect, the Commission will be rather straightforward, but of course, decision will be up on the Council to whether or not to grant Georgia the candidate status. But I stay positive in this respect.
I appreciate your optimism and positive approach. Before going to the final remarks and the answers to my questions to Milena, I would like to ask Wojciech. We didn't talk too much about the war of Ukraine against Russia's invasion and against Putin's regime, and of course the war of Israel against the Hamas and the terrorism. So it is a large issue. It is a large topic. But do you think, Wojciech, that this results, outcomes of the war of Ukraine would affect the enlargement process, as well as the developments in the Middle East would affect the processes inside the European Union?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it has and it will have the impact of the EU enlargement process. As I said at the beginning, that situation regarding EU enlargement has changed after the outbreak of the Russian-Ukrainian war. During the more than last 10 years, we have been observing the what was called EU enlargement fatigue. So the geopolitical situation has changed completely and has influence on the European situation. And in my opinion, the political elites of European countries from the old Europe, finally they realized the real attitude of Russian Federation. But of course, the most important issue is the constantly in the future support for Ukraine, because if Ukraine fails, we'll not be able to talk about any Ukraine integration and EU enlargement process, and there are some risks for sure. The first factor is that a conflict in Israel, between Israel and Hamas, you mentioned about, because United States, who is the biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine, now is more and more focused on the situation in the Middle East, and for sure part of that military equipment will be sent to Israel than Ukraine. And the second factor, the second risk, which could be seen on the horizon and short-term perspective, as the presidential elections in US. If there's a risk that the Republican candidate, maybe even Donald Trump, will come back to power. And we have been observing for several last months, the increasing debate regarding the supporting Ukraine from US side, and more voices which are against those processes. And the second factor, the second risk, is the situation in the Indo-Pacific region. If China decides to solve the issue of Taiwan, also Western world, especially USA, will be forced to react even military on that step. So many issues are on the agenda, but I would like also to stay as optimist as Teona regarding not only the Georgian perspective regarding integration with the European Union, but also the Ukrainian chances in that conflict with war. Poland, as a neighbor of Ukraine, is absolutely interested in the victory of Ukraine. If not, Poland could be the next victim of the Russian imperialistic policy, aggressive policy. So we should be united. We should put all our resources, political, financial, diplomatic, military, to help Ukraine to win with Russia. But I'm afraid that the process will last not only several months, but even maybe several years. it's not so easy, you know, to win military in that conflict, because Russian Federation has a lot of has a capacity to continue this conflict. I mean, the huge population, the possibility to produce more weapons, to buy some weapons in Iran,
Get them from North Korea and others.
yes, also. So I'm, as I said, that process will be quite complicated, but I'm also quite optimistic that it will end in positive way.
Thank you very much. And we started with Milena. We will end now our webinar with Milena's comments. What do you think, Milena? Are the comments from you coming as the same optimistic way as from Teona and Wojciech?
Those who know me well know me as an eternal optimist and a queen of silver lining. I always manage to find a silver lining in every situation. I have to say that when it comes to Serbia, I'm becoming a little bit more pessimistic in the near future perspective. When the near future perspective is concerned. I think that the current government in Serbia is not honestly and genuinely EU-minded. They see the relationship with the EU as a largely transactional relationship, which of course in times when of geopolitical primacy over everything else is still bearing some fruit. But we do also see that Serbia has effectively not made any progress in the EU accession process for several years now. And I don't think that we will have any new clusters opened anytime soon. The question is just whether the Commission will start to call spade a spade and to honestly and objectively recognize the problems of Serbian democracy and state capture, which has really engorged the entire society. And this is something that I think is the main problem, not the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. Depending on who is in power in Serbia and who is in power in Kosovo, we could have a much more constructive environment for resolving that problem at a later stage. I don't think that resolving the issue between Kosovo and Serbia at this point should be the first item on the agenda of the EU, because this is a long-standing conflict, a frozen conflict, and as long as there is some sort of a dialogue going on, and at least some sort of small steps and de-escalation, of course, and maintenance of status quo, I don't think that this is the most imminent problem. I think that the most imminent problem for Serbia right now is rule of law and democracy. And unless the EU starts to really prioritize those issues rather than making them basically hostage of other more geopolitical issues which are related to stability, also Serbia's lack of actual genuine will to fully side with the EU in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because as you know, Serbia, while it has voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolutions against Russia, while it has voted to expel Russia from the UN Council for Human Rights, and it has openly condemned Russia's aggression on Ukraine, it hasn't aligned with the sanctioning policy towards Russia. So Serbia remains a more ambiguous player in this story. As long as Serbia is not actually facilitating the aversion of sanctions against Russia, I don't think that it has to be the first priority. The first priority indeed is the horrible erosion of democracy which we have in Serbia, and unless Serbia goes back to a more democratic and rule of law track, I don't think that we can even argue that we are a credible candidate for EU membership.
I appreciate your answers, straightforward. You have demonstrated very good skills of drawing defined lines in your answers and position. Thank you very much. I wish you success. I wish you the positive developments and changes, and I appreciate all three of yours involvement and participation in our today's webinar. I want to thank Milena Mihajlovic from Serbia, from the CEP for Center of European Policy, also Teona Lavrelashvili from the European Policy Center based in Brussels, and Wojciech Wojtasiewicz, who joined us from Warsaw Political, the Center for the International Affairs, Political Institute for International Affairs. I appreciate. Thank you very much. I hope very much that next time we will be able to do the webinar or the conference or the panel here in Georgia. But so far, thank you for this virtual meeting and the communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very
very
much.
interesting discussion, and we are waiting for you, Western Balkans, Eastern European, in our European family, and I really hope that one day the Europe will be united.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Have a
you.
nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.